even after a genocide, even after people of all walks of life being killed, even after all the knowledge of the number of journalists and health workers and ambulance drivers, and yet I still somehow, in order to protect myself, have to ask that question in terms of, as opposed to flipping around its logic and kind of going, what is this fucking world?
There is so much the world, especially the art world, has to learn from the Gaza scene, which is you occupy us, you put us in a cage, you prevent us from having art paints, you kill our artists, you kill and you destroy the art centers, the heritage, the culture, Rashad al-Shawa Center, Al-Mishal Theater, which was one of the main theaters in Gaza, but we still rise and we still continue to make works and we still continue to tell the story, which is a strong part of our fight as people.
Hello and welcome back to Palestine Deep Dive. Today I am thrilled to be joined by two friends, the phenomenal actor, activist and playwright Khalid Abdalla and the world-renowned artist and fellow Palestinian from Gaza, Malak Mattar. Unfortunately, my co-host Hala Hanina can't be with us today. She is completing her PhD, so we wish her all the luck in the world and we will see her next week, inshallah. Before I turn to our guests, here's a quick summary of some of the biggest stories from across Palestine and the wider region this week. Israeli forces and settlers have killed at least 11 Palestinians across the occupied Palestine this week. In Gaza, at least 7 were killed in a series of Israeli attacks, including in northern Gaza, where Palestinian women was killed when Israeli naval forces shelled tents sheltering displaced families northwest of Beit Lahia. In the occupied West Bank, 4 Palestinians were killed on Tuesday, including 2 in an attack by Israeli settlers in Al-Mughayr Boys' School east of Ramallah. In Hebron, occupied West Bank, 16-year-old boy Muhammad Majdi al-Ja'bari was killed when he was struck by a vehicle belonging to a security convoy escorting an Israeli minister near illegal settlement of Kiryat Arba. It is reported that the convoy was providing security for the Israeli settlement minister, Orit Strok, who lives in an illegal settlement in Hebron. We have also seen Israeli army continuing its brutality across Lebanon with continued airstrikes and killing. Israel has killed at least 254 people in Lebanon after the US-Iran agreement of ceasefire. We will be covering more of these stories throughout our show, so stay tuned. Malak and Khalid, thank you very much for joining me today. It's really amazing to see you here. How are you? How are you? It's always the most difficult question, you know.
How are you is a very dangerous question in these times.
When we designed this chat show, we wanted to be cheerful, we wanted to be hopeful, and look at us starting the chat show with all of these news, killing and murdering and occupation. It's really sad. It's like we can't escape it. We can't escape our reality. But it's really good to be with you. I remember when I first met Malak 10 years ago, I think.
Yes.
When you were a child yet. You were organizing your first exhibition in Gaza. In Beit al-Sahaf, a house of press.
Yes.
That was the first time we met. And I never thought that 10 years later, we would meet again. In London, in our studio, full of your artwork.
Oh my God.
How does it feel?
Well, it feels a lot of things. I just feel it's been a rough journey to begin with, but it's been a resilient journey. I think about every time I really went to art as a way of surviving, but also as a way of documenting what we've lived through. I look at some of the paintings and I recall what happened when I did this work. For example, Thawra, Revolution. I remember when I painted it in 2019, it was the time where Isra al-Ghraib was killed by one of her family members. And it was the time where I felt that we as Palestinian women, we deserve more. We are facing layers of patriarchy, but also colonization, which is really too rough and too heavy on us to carry, beside holding families and going to school and teaching and working. So I call myself privileged to be able to be a painter and to be able to carry with me the stories that I grew up with in Gaza, but also our encounter. And what We Are Not Numbers meant to me as someone who had no outlook, we had no reach to the world outside. So being part of We Are Not Numbers was really a gesture of hope for me and many of my colleagues. And it was the time where we collaborated. So poets would reach out, can we use this painting? I would reach to writers, could you use this script as to follow with my painting? So it opened doors and it opens connection with my fellow
And
colleagues.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy that we met. I'm very happy that we were able to help publish some of your art and your poetry. And also Malak, by the way, she has one of our poems in our book, We Are Not Numbers, The Voices of Gaza, You with Khalid. I never thought one day will come where I will meet with you in our studio. I remember the first time I saw some of your work when I was in Gaza, the Kite Runner. And I never thought in my life that one day I will be sitting with you.
Well, I mean, for me, the honor is truly mine.
Oh,
because I'm the one who feels like I am in a very special space in terms of what you have been carrying, not just over these last 2 years, but beyond that, in terms of what this show, what this podcast has been carrying, in terms of the conversation, the intersection of people and voices. It's an honor for me to be here. So it's really the other way around.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that we have this space where we, Palestinians and non-Palestinians, can meet, talk freely, without interruption, without taking away one's agency. It's really, I'm really proud of this. There is a lot I want to talk to you about, Khalid. Definitely, I'm going to talk about the crown and your role there. And some of our audience, when we told them that we're going to have Khalid, they asked us, ask him, who killed Princess Diana? I'm not going to ask you this question, though. Before we go to that part, over the weekend, there was a lot of pictures that were taken in Lebanon, and they went viral online. We want to see some of them and see your reaction to them. Here is the first picture. And it is it's a picture taken in Lebanon of an Israeli soldier storming into a Lebanese house and cooking food. And, you know, for me as a Palestinian, this picture revokes a lot of emotions. I see, well, it's 2026, but when I look at this picture, I see the Nakba 1948, where some Zionist forces came from all around the world, took our houses. I remember, like, my grandparents lived in Jaffa, and I can see that maybe at that time there was one Israeli soldier who entered my grandparents' house in Jaffa and took it, and they still live in it until now. It is happening over and over again. But what is shocking me is the sheer shamelessness. I mean, look at them taking a house, cooking the food there, the food that belongs to a Lebanese family, and taking a picture and posting it online. How do you feel? How do you feel watching this in this period of time in 2026?
I feel you should answer first.
I mean, it's such a heartbreaking image because when you look at it, there is so much life in this kitchen. You look at the bottle, you look at the gloves, you look at, you know, you feel like this place has been inhabited by a family, by a mother, by people. And I think about also is one of the many villages that have been forced to evacuate. So you think about the destiny of this family, that they could be homeless in the streets, while soldiers who have absolutely no right to be in this house, to be in this land, enjoying her time. So it's heartbreaking. As you said, it's shameless. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's the quiet violence. It's the quiet violence of the image. It's the fact that you could look at the image and see, oh, it's just a lady in the kitchen cooking some food. And of course, it's entirely normalized. You ask the question, how could this be happening in 2026? at some level, that's a ridiculous question, because this is the least of what is happening in 2026 in terms of the variety of images that are far more violent that we have seen over the last 2 years. And as you say, this is a repetition of what's been going on since 1948 and onwards. But for me, it's the quiet violence. It's the ease with which she's standing there, pouring the cooking oil,
smiling and laughing.
And it's the fact that it's an unremarkable image, which is what makes it so violent. For me, at some level, it also kind of, it's not just about the reality of what it represents in terms of Lebanon or in terms of Palestine. To me, it's also representative of the quiet violence of the world in general. You know, you asked, how are you at the beginning? The truth is I live in a kind of constant situation of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Right? I live in a situation where I am still trying to understand and compute, not process. I don't even know what the right word is. The fact that I have lived through the last 2 years of genocide, and the genocide continues, the world continues as it is. Oh, 1 million Lebanese can be displaced, as if that's now totally normal. 245 can be killed during a ceasefire, over 2,000 over the last few weeks. You know, everything like this. And this is a normal image, you know? This is a gentle image in comparison to everything else. And you know, the other thing that's striking to me about it as an image is that there are some people who are able to read it.
Yeah.
And there are some people who aren't.
Wow.
And it's,
you know?
yeah.
And it's the fact that some immediately see it and kind of go, and others who don't understand. And I think that's a sort of sign of the world and
others who choose
and
not
this
to
moment.
understand, maybe.
Well, you know, maybe some choose. I mean, yeah, we'll get into the question of maybe we'll get into the question of who to blame and who not to blame and whose responsibility it is. But fact of the matter is, this is the world that we're in, and you know, we're in a conversation here, two artists, right? So we understand narrative, we understand image, we understand what's going on inside, you know, inside these moments and what they reflect about our society. It's how gentle that image is that is so painful.
It is.
I mean,
Malak, you left Gaza only a few days before the genocide started. Your house is in Gaza. What happened to your home?
So, like the place I grew up with is still semi-standing, but the house of my grandparents has fully been leveled up, and it's the house that has the reason of why I became an artist in the first place. It was the place that I was exposed to posters of Van Gogh, of Edgar Degas, the dancers, but also equally artists from our region, Palestinian artists, Egyptian artists, Moroccan, Algerian artists. So I grew up within this like two cultures, and I got to see the beauty of these two completely like different cultures. But I had my first exposure to art books, archives, due to this house.
So you see, for many people, when they watch a destroyed home, when they learn about a home destroyed, they don't really understand the gravity of this. A home is not just walls and bricks. A home is where we belong. It's where we grew up. It's where we received our education, where we received the love and the support and the family.
Yeah.
And all of it just goes away. And this, ever since I saw this picture, I always think of the family who own this place, and now they see it occupied by Israeli soldiers who are enjoying stealing the food and the grocery and cooking it.
Yeah.
And the family maybe know that the Israelis may never leave this house forever. It's what happened to us in the Nakba. It's what happened to the people in Gaza after the genocide. Now half of Gaza is taken by the Israelis. The Israelis don't seem to want to evacuate these areas. And it's happening over and over again. And no one is stopping this genocidal army from enjoying the theft and stealing our food. But the brutality of Israel does not stop here. We have a different type of brutality. And this type of brutality, I think I don't know why I feel like the Israeli army enjoys how they kill the Palestinians and the Lebanese people. Here I want to show you another video that shows another form of sadism that the Israelis enjoy nowadays. Let's see this video together in Lebanon again.
عود الشباب يمكن مروا يا علي مدد الله أكبر ضربوه يا الله ضربوه للشاب اللي هرب يا الله يا الله
Some people may not understand what was happening here. And what was happening is this. The Israeli army called a man in his car with his family, and they told him, do you want to die alone or do you want to die with your family? If you want to die alone, leave the car immediately and go somewhere else where we can kill you on your own. If you want to stay in the car, we're going to kill you and all your family. The guy chose to leave the car immediately and run away, and they bombed him only seconds later. Some people would say, okay, they give him the option, they don't want to kill his family. What if the guy was terrified and did not want to leave? They would kill him with his family. And who are you to begin with to decide how to kill these people? I mean, this era is so dark. The future is so dark, where there is an occupation army can decide when and how to kill people and play games with how they kill people. How does that make you feel? As an Arab, as an Egyptian man, as an artist?
I mean, when I first saw that video and understood it, because it took a second to understand what was going on, it made my eyes water. Because I, on the one side, imagine the speed with which he needs to make the decision. And on the other, I imagine his family inside trying to interpret this moment. And then going through the trauma of the father, the brother, the husband being killed. And then for the rest of their lives, at some level, living inside this moment.
Mm.
And at the same time, I also interpret it. I also interpret its violence not just in what happened in the incident, but also in the way that, you know, I mean, even in conversation, you're used to this feeling of the gun at your head, you know. Or, you know, as Ghassan Kanafani put it, you know, the
Conversation between the
sword at your, you know, at your neck, right? Part of what this does in terms of, you know, creating the constant sense of surveillance, creating the constant sense of threat, of lack of safety, while, you know, while in pursuit of liberation, it's you know, there's you're and at the same time, it's not news.
It's not.
You know, in the same way as the previous image, and maybe this is something that we will keep returning to. It's familiar. You know, I mean, it's in this, you know, you will know better than me within a Palestinian context the number of people who you know, for whom similar phone calls might have come, you know, but the constant stories that we have received of drones following people, and its relationship with AI and its wider relationship with these structures of surveillance that are becoming more and more pervasive in our life. Its relationship with Minnesota, its relationship with, you know, the wider infrastructures of surveillance in the world. It's and Palestine and Lebanon, but as a kind of laboratory in which these forms of violence are tested out before they're rolled out everywhere else. So it's so many layers in terms of what you begin to interpret. And then of course there's that sort of the logic of justification that we have become so kind of normalized into asking, where you would presume someone will watch that and kind of go, well, is that person guilty? Do they deserve to die?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do I have to do my due diligence as well of asking that question? Even after a genocide, even after people of all walks of life being killed, even after all the knowledge of the number of journalists and health workers and ambulance drivers and every other form, and yet I still somehow, in order to protect myself, have to ask that question in terms of, as opposed to flipping around its logic and kind of going, what is this fucking world?
Exactly. Malak, you're from Gaza, and this story does not stand alone. We heard so many stories of Palestinians who were given the same option by the Israeli army: leave your tent or die with your family. We have been hearing these stories over and over. Now you live in the UK, in London, and I'm sorry to hear yesterday a gang robbed you, stole your phone. But I mean, like, this sense of insecurity and unsafety is happening here and there. But recently we heard that Palantir, this scary, dodgy AI company, is taking our health records in the UK. The London police now, they might enforce the face recognition technology here.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of world are we living in? How do you react to this?
It's definitely a scary world. And every time I feel like I need to escape, I just go to my studio. And I know I'm more safe just among the elements of ink, watercolor, acrylics, my books and researching. And this gives me some sanity in a world where if you leave your house, you might be attacked or you might be robbed, as happened to me yesterday. It was insane. But I also, and this is so disturbing, what I'm about to say. But when I saw this video, I was very, it's devastating. But I think of my neighbor back in 2014, who was killed without any warning. Her house was struck. Her husband, he was standing on the roof, and from the intensity of the airstrike, he jumped, he flew all across the street. And she was almost maimed, she was torn into pieces. And I remember that very vividly. She received no warnings. And tens of thousands of people don't even have the option of leave the house now, we will bomb you, etc. So I feel disturbed to even say that, but this is how low the humanity got us. Is you just feel entire families didn't even have the option to choose. It's either me or my family to be killed. We are at the bottom of humanity. And that's why I feel we just have to keep rising, and we have to keep talking, and we have to keep protesting in any way or shape or form. We have to resist against normalizing this reality, which should never be normalized.
Yeah, before we started recording, we were talking about this news. All of this is not a news anymore. It's a cycle that is repeated over and over again. It seems never ending. And yes, we have been viewed by the world that we are at the bottom of humanity. We are not. We are at the top of humanity. I remember last week I was on a visit to the EU Parliament, and I met with an MEP. And he told me, this is what disturbs me a lot. And I said this story many times, but I can't not say it over and over. And this MEP, he told me that, I know he was describing to him how Israel is a genocidal, apartheid state, and how Netanyahu is a war criminal and all of it. And he said, Ahmed, stop, don't tell me all of that. And I said, why? And he said, because I already know that. We already know that Israel is committing a genocide, Israel is committing war crimes, and all the rest of it. But, he said to me, he said, we support Israel because Israel is the shield that protects us from the Islamists in the Middle East.
Wow.
And I was like, really? Does Israel protect the West? He sees it as Israel is protecting the Christians of the West from the Islamists in the UK. Well, we have seen how Israel treats Christians in Palestine and Christians in Lebanon as well. We have seen this picture a few days ago with an Israeli soldier smashing the statue of Jesus Christ. Can we see this picture again, guys? So this is an Israeli soldier smashing a statue of Jesus Christ in Lebanon. And what annoyed me about this picture, not only that they are desecrating a holy statue that is regarded holy for billions of people all around the world, is that the media talked about this picture way more than they talked about how the actual Christians in Palestine were treated by the Israeli army. They were spat on, they were killed, they were mistreated, and all of it. And now the Western media all taking this picture. Of course, Israel and the Israeli army, after it went viral, they apologized, you know. And I want to ask you, I want to ask both of you actually, how does it feel to you that Israel apologized for this picture because it went viral, but Israel never apologized for the genocide? A genocide. How much do we care right now about pictures and statues more than the actual lives of the people? And I say in no words, I say that I justify this. This is horrible. This is horrendous. This is desecration of an entire religion that is peaceful and lovely and should be sacred and protected. But the West looks at these genocidal army as protectors of the Western civilization, as the protectors of the Christianity all around the world. How does that feel to you?
I mean, this image reminds me a lot of the systematic cultural and religious obliteration, especially in the Gaza Strip. One of the oldest churches in Gaza, the St. Bosphorus Church, has been bombed. The Church of Jabalia has been bombed. Al-Umari Mosque, almost 200 religious and cultural sites have been destroyed during the genocide, but also before that. So apologies are really hypocritical and they don't mean anything. But it also comes after decades of disrespecting religion and culture over and over again as a technique of erasing the people and erasing their culture, erasing their religious sites, which are very well taken care of, very well protected. It makes me think of Qasr al-Basha, which 70% of it has been destroyed by Israel. Only 30% of it is still standing, and it's now currently being persevered by the people who are volunteering to protect the remnants of this very important and one of the oldest museums in the Gaza Strip. But also, from 17 to 20,000 artifacts have been looted and reported missing. So in few weeks, in few months, we will find these artifacts, which should belong to the indigenous of the land and the indigenous people, are being exhibited in the museums of Israel, in glamorous exhibitions. And this is really one of the ugliness of the colonization, is that you simply are stolen. Your history, your food, your culture is constantly being stolen from your very land. So it really reminded me of many things. But I also have to mention a very brief story of the Church of St. Bosphorus, which, as an artist, it has impacted me a lot in my work. So my mom was a school teacher, and she would bring her students into trips. So we would start with Al-Umari Mosque, and then we would go to the St. Bosphorus and around the city, the old city of Gaza City. And it was one of the earliest time I have encountered icons, original painting in the roof. And I was absolutely fascinated by what I've seen, that almost 200 paintings are influenced by the icons, have golden halos. And I constantly get asked, like, why do you put golden halos? But I was very, like, fascinated by what I've seen. So I feel personally connected to this church as one of the most important and most cherished churches in the Gaza city.
I've been to that church.
It's absolutely
beautiful.
fascinating.
It's absolutely beautiful. It should be protected. It should be protected, not bombed.
And it's bombed inside people who took it as a shelter.
Exactly.
Because they think this is safer than my home, and they would go there. Unfortunately, many people have lost their lives inside this church.
Yeah, I mean, the symbolic power of the image, I think kind of travels on multiple levels. Of course, as soon as you've taken it down now, I kind of want to say it again. But on the one side, obviously, when I see it, I immediately see all of the other images that I have seen of the impunity of Israeli soldiers filming themselves, taking photographs of themselves, destroying universities, wearing women's clothes, desecrating people's homes, making fun of Palestinians while killing them. That's on the one level I see that. And exactly as you say, I feel the assault in the fact that there is an outcry in relation to this image that is not equal to the outcry in relation to those other images, to the extent that the words that want to come out of my mouth are that if Jesus were alive today, as well as being offended by being attacked in this way, I would hope he would say, care more about the people who have been killed than a statue of me.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Right?
Definitely.
And it is the fact that there is this imbalance that means that part of what the image does as well is tell us about the dynamics of power that are current. Why does Benjamin Netanyahu or other people apologize for this image? Because they are scared of losing the Christian evangelical support that they have in the US.
Yeah.
They are scared of the further loss of Catholic support around the world, and what it would mean in terms of the support base that exists in the West in general, and not just in the West that flows into the dynamics of what you were talking about. So it's there's not just the iconic symbolism of the image in terms of what it's capturing. There's also the power dynamics that are inside it and underneath it.
Yeah, I've always tried not to talk about religions and theologies. I'm definitely not a Christian, but I've been to countless churches here in the UK. I've even been to Iona Island, where I spent a week with pilgrims who go to Iona Island and do their pilgrimage. And that was one of the most beautiful times of my life, to be honest. I've stayed at the cathedral there, Iona, and I've learned a lot about Christianity there. But what I found fascinating about the religion is that the emphasis on peace. The Christianity cares so much about peace and forgiveness, and everything Israel does is un-Christian. It's opposite to Christianity. And I'm just annoyed to see that the Western world, the Christian world, find themselves in proximity with the Israeli army that is so un-Christian, and they forget about their brothers and sisters who are Christians and Muslims who live in Palestine, who have been abused and killed and traumatized by this genocidal Israeli regime. I just don't understand it.
Forgive me, though. I don't think we should call it un-Christian or un-Islamic or un-Jewish. I just think we should call it immoral.
Immoral.
I don't think it's a matter of attaching any religious identity to it. I think it's just simply that what we are seeing are levels of depraved, unaccountable behavior in various different forms with Israel in this moment of kind of turbocharged impunity, attempting to desecrate and expand into forms of a greater Israel that it is talking about openly. And so, the recurrence of these images becomes part of what happens, when you are marauding in this way with such unaccountability and such impunity, and just left to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
These are, and sometimes these images appear as forms of violence themselves that almost feel intentional. And sometimes, like this one, they trip up into ones that, from an Israeli point of view, they feel they need to apologize for because it falls into the other power dynamics that they have to account for. But from our perspective, or anyone sane, as far as I'm concerned, who can see what's going on here, it is simply just another drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
Of a genocidal expansionist project.
And I recall what happened just now when the Notre Dame church was burned in France, and the world was on fire, UNESCO helping, people donating, fundraising.
Yeah.
And I was in Gaza back at the time, and I saw the amount of everyone was sharing it. And of course, it's such a horrendous thing to happen for one of the world's oldest church and also most important churches in France. But when it comes to the churches in Palestine, it just becomes a different story. Well, you never know what was there. Well, you never know who got into the church in the first place. There is so many justifications for why it's a collateral damage, why it might have been damaged as a result of something. But still, it's a holy place that should be respected, just as the Notre Dame church in France.
It's the third oldest church in the world.
And it shouldn't be the comparison between this and that. It should be, I'm just referring to the holy place. And as a church, speaking of it as a religious site.
Not only holy, but also very ancient. I mean, it should be protected.
It's the third oldest church in the world.
Well, talking about, sorry, I will cut you off here. Talking about Christianity in the churches. Yesterday I read a piece by the BBC. Let's guys, if we can show the piece by the BBC about the Popemobile. So it says, Popemobile child clinic yet to reach Gaza 1 year after Francis' death. So if you don't know the story, it's one of the last wishes of Pope Francis was to turn his Popemobile to a clinic that go to Gaza and treated children in Gaza. So 1 year after his death, his mobile did not enter Gaza, but see how the BBC reported it. The clinic is just waiting or hasn't arrived in Gaza. How do you react to this news? What do you think is wrong with this title?
To be honest, it's a funny looking clinic. I never saw anything like that before.
No, but obviously,
The title is,
obviously, it's the fact that it's the news story rather than it being put in the context of everything else that is not being allowed into Gaza. And yet, at the same time, I also have to say that part of me is also, I think that's also the power of the gesture from Pope Francis.
Exactly.
Right? Part of the power of the gesture to say, this is what I want the clinic to do. This is what I want my Pope to be able to do. This is where I want it to go, is about also making clear what is being held up and what is not being allowed. What is not being allowed into Gaza, and the way in which the blockade is continuing.
But
I think but then it also opens up the other questions. It's like, okay, wait. So if the Popemobile was to go, it's part of the reason they don't want it to go in, because what would happen if it was bombed? Mm-hmm. It becomes more of a liability than a hospital, and that's a very painful idea. That the Popemobile is something that needs to be kept more sacred than the hospitals in Gaza, 50% of which I understand now are completely non-functional, you know. So again, this is the, you know, with all respect to the story and the importance of the gesture, this is again, it's the flotsam, you know.
Yeah.
It's the flotsam of where we have got to, right, in a situation where the simple truths of what people in Gaza and in Palestine, broadly speaking, are living is apparently no longer news.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think this week as well, there was a report, you know, another report issued by the UN, which, you know, talks about the degree of devastation. And of course, this is no longer news, right? But I mean, I was reading part of it on the way over, and one of the things inside it is it says, you know, apart from 1 billion or whatever it is in terms of reconstruction costs and itemizing everything, it says that human development has been put back by 77 years. And there's some part of me that I kind of went, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, 77 years is an entire lifetime of someone. You know, and I'm sure that the average life expectancy now in Gaza is below 77 years. You know, so and of course that's not news. And then I read something else where someone was saying that what is being, you know, what is happening here is the very idea of time is being dissolved.
Exactly.
The very idea of life is being turned into something that is below survival.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know, and then it's the normalization of that, you know. It's that, and you know, and that feeds into what we're doing in this section. You know, is what we're encountering here is this news? Is this where we have to go in order to be able to talk about what's actually happening in the world? And what happens when we normalize? You know, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the forms of dissonance that I feel like I'm constantly living in, which is maybe what, you know, if I'm to help you move into the next segment, right? But you know, in terms of then what that demands of us as artists,
Yeah.
Yes.
right? What that demands of us as journalists, what that demands of us as other, you know, as people working in the various sectors of society, to get beyond the details of what are thrown at us like poison arrows, you know, they hit.
Yeah.
You know, they really hit because they hit the nerve of what is not being accounted for, what is not being talked of, what is being treated as khalas, it's normal. Who cares?
I agree with you. But from a journalist's point of view, I think what's also,
The
besides
headlines.
like how the headline was written in this passive voice.
Yes.
I mean,
who stopped it from going
they
in?
couldn't even name Israel. They couldn't even say Israel refused the Popemobile from entering Gaza as well. And if you read all of the passage, all of the story, it doesn't mention Israel. It doesn't mention that Israel is the main reason behind the hindering of this automobile going to Gaza. But I will have to move on to the another message that came to us from Gaza by our contributors, Ali and Huda, if we can play their videos.
Hello everyone, I am Ali Skaik.
And I am Huda Skaik, and we are both writers from Gaza City.
While you were watching our live stream on Palestine Deep Dive last week, the reality here in Gaza was claiming more lives. The journalist Mohammed Bishah was assassinated in his car while he was heading to his house, which is located in the south of Gaza. Just 2 days ago, the journalist Ibrahim Qneta was killed while he was sitting in a cafe. Perhaps he was having a time of rest and joy. Perhaps he was uploading his reports. And this reminded us of Al-Baqa massacre that was in July, in last July. And it's like a kind of message from the IOF that tells us that they are still here and that they suffocate us gradually, and that they will not let us have the time of joy. And last night I was in a restaurant here in a Rimal neighborhood alongside my cousin and his friend. We had just watched a football match and we're eating shawarma, but we weren't just eating, we were calculating. We were tense, preparing ourselves for the worst, because we know that in a moment the restaurant, a car outside, or even the beside building could be bombed in a moment. And this reminded me of what Ahmed said last week, that the IOF is a death machine. It doesn't matter where you are, a car, a restaurant, a cafe, or even a hospital, the machine doesn't stop.
Yeah. Hospitals are struggling to survive here in Gaza. There is a few number of hospitals that are still functioning currently in Gaza. There is also a huge challenge because there is a few number of staff, doctors have been killed, imprisoned, and also injured. We still remember Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who is still in the Israeli prisoners until now, because he hasn't left his injured people in his hospitals. And also we are only waiting for his release. Also, Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was killed inside the Israeli prisoners, is a great example of the professional doctor. Also, now currently the cancer and also heart patients are dying slowly, and the doctors here in Gaza are standing helplessly, not knowing what to do for them. I recently interviewed Dr. Muhammad Abu Salmiya, the head director of Al Shifa Hospital, and he told me that around 18,000 people are trapped in Gaza City. They are patients and they are waiting for medical treatment, an urgent medical treatment, to travel abroad to seek some medicine outside of Gaza, which does not exist in Gaza.
That was Huda and Ali from Gaza. And I know as a Gazan, it might be very emotional for you. Every time, I don't care how we feel right now. I know every time I hear these young people from Gaza share their experiences from Gaza, it brings back the trauma to me again and again, but I don't care. These people we will always have to listen to these people and to listen to their stories. I don't want to ask so much of you to tell me how do you feel hearing the same stories over and over from Gaza.
Yeah,
Malak.
I heard the adhan, the prayer call, and
Yes.
it's yeah.
I know,
Well,
it feels like Gaza.
Yeah, it's. But I remembered when I used to have calls, etc., and it always comes and people, oh my God, what a nice music, and I was like,
It's not a good
sorry, this is a prayer call, this is adhan. So I just miss being home, to be honest.
I miss being home. We will
Yeah.
talk about what home is at the end of this show for a Gazan, for an Egyptian, and a British.
I miss not being robbed. Robbed, like stolen while walking. There's, maybe Gaza was, yes, it was constantly bombardment.
I was robbed last week. I was robbed as well. Like
Really?
my laptop, my backpack, it was all robbed, and I reported it, and no one
But
bothered to search for my lost property.
There is
But I
this
was never robbed in Gaza.
Yeah.
Never.
There is this feeling that, you're walking in your land. You are recognized by your people. There's this sense of safety. Although you're bombed from time to time, you're under a military blockade. But, if you fall, there will be tens of people getting you up. If you need something, you will find help. There's this, minor details, as Adina mentions in her book, that really opens a whole new wound of what it is to be reminded by something. And yeah, I'm reminded by Gaza every single day, every single moment that passes. You think of home and you think of the beauty of your people and how much they really cared for each other. They stood for each other. They were there for each other. They were collectives rather than individuals. And
you know,
yeah.
Malak, I lived in Gaza for 23 or 24 years. And I don't remember we ever locked our house when we went.
Yeah, why would you?
We feel safe. Anyway, I want to talk more with you about your art, your culture, and your paintings and all of it. But I have just to remind our audience, if you are enjoying this show, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube. And if you want to support our work, we warmly welcome you to donate as little as £1 a month. Your support helps us build independent Palestinian-led media in a world which has never needed it more. Find the link in the description below. And I'm back to you, Malak, again. We started this chat show talking about the art in the in our studio. As you can see, we have Malak here, Malak there, Malak here, Malak here, there.
I'm so
4 out of
flattered.
6.
Thank you. Yeah.
4 out of 6 or 7 paintings in our studio are yours. We love that. We really appreciate you allowing us to put your artwork in our studio. So thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about some of these paintings. And also, Khalid is an artist in his own way. You're a singer, for God's sake. Beautiful voice.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Many,
and you
many
can do
things
piano.
Yeah.
You're an actor, playwright. Amazing. So we would really love to you to weigh in this conversation. Please don't feel abandoned. We want to talk about this painting, Malak. And I believe you called it Last Night in Gaza?
Yes.
This one.
Yes.
Tell me about it.
All right. So I went to Gaza in 2021 in March, and I stayed there for 7 months following the May attack of 2021. And I painted this as a last night in Gaza because it was literally the last night I stayed in Gaza before I was heading to Egypt. And I was extremely concerned because crossing the border is one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. And I wanted, regardless of the fear that I had of crossing, of facing this days in the border and all of this troubles, I still wanted to end in a good note and paint the beautiful things that is very strongly connected to Gaza, like the sunbirds, the sunset. And I lived just next to the sea, Mediterranean Sea. So I would see the waves, I would see the sun coming in and out.
Oh, wow.
So this is
Khalid, this is what distinguished Malak ever since we knew her, is the colorful art that she produces. It's really beautiful. That's how we knew Malak. And then suddenly,
I feel,
the genocide happened, and then Malak went missing. No, she did not go missing.
My palette went missing.
And then her art, it changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And this question is both of you, actually. The following art is, I call it Gaza's Guernica.
Yeah.
But it's not called Gaza's Guernica.
Yeah, it's
this
absolutely
one.
not.
So from all of these colorful paintings, then we go to this painting that changed your way of art, I think. This was the first time I see a painting for Malak that is in black and white. Yeah. And it's massive. It's like massive, not small. And it says a lot. My question to you, Khalid, sorry, before you comment on it. This is, we call it Gaza's Guernica because it's similar to Picasso's Guernica. Who is a better artist?
Oh my God. Stop it.
Tell me, honest opinion.
No, I'm not going to answer
Well,
that.
see it as...
but literally because, I'm not going to answer it because the comparative is but the question for me is, what is Malak holding for us all at this moment? as what was Picasso holding at the moment of Guernica. And the question is are we individually and collectively as artists trying to respond to the moment, and are we trying to find ways to relate to it, and do we manage to create something that speaks? And for me, all of these paintings do.
Yes.
You know, and I'm always struck in Malak's paintings personally by the fact that there is very often a very direct gaze.
Yes.
From some aspect of the painting, if not multiple aspects of the painting. And to me, it's always looking at me, asking the question, do you see me? What are you going to do?
Wow.
Can you hold and see what I see? It's, you know, and the more I'm actually being in the studio, there's, you know, one of the times that the thoughts come to me most clearly because I have a painting over there looking at me, and the eyes are generally slightly larger than, you know, than the actual anatomical eye. And that eye is asking me a question. And there's always a kind of, for me, there's always a gentleness as well in that eye, which has a kind of a beautiful humanity to it. And it was interesting, even looking at the last painting, you know, I was reflecting on the question, what would it be? You know, the painting is called Last Night in Gaza. What would it be if it was First Night in Gaza? You know, and at some level, what's being held in that sun? You know, whether it's a dawn or whether it's a sunset, right? And the desire of what's, I mean, for me, what I see in terms of what it's holding in a dream, right? In terms of what the figure in the middle is being enveloped in, and the desire to hold what you love about the land, what you love about the country, what you love about the people, what you love about the history, what you love about, you know, and what you can see that maybe others can't. And of course, the contrast between the two paintings, or these two periods, is very strong and clear, even if you don't feel confident to speak about art. You know, because I think everyone, you know, I think how people respond to an artwork is always valid. And I think very often we're taught to you know, to feel that our responses are not valid without a certain level of education or whatever it is. And I just think that's not true. But, you know, the very basic thing, when you see you see the color here, and you see what's the love that is being tried, you know, that is being communicated.
Yes.
In its relationship with the title. And then you see the other image, and it is after what, as far as I can tell, was your last night in Gaza, which has a whole story. I don't know, I know it, but I don't know how you want to share your relationship with painting after you left. But it, you know, I don't see it. You know, I would read it and not go, oh, this is a conscious decision, you know, thinking of my blue period and my black period.
Never.
No,
it was
just
not
like, how do I respond?
that rational.
This is, you know, when I look at this painting, when I saw it for the first time, I saw myself in it, inside it. You know, this word, طولت. That's what I was saying all day and night.
You should translate for
yes,
those who don't
طولت.
understand.
It's been a long time. It took so long. And we mean the genocide. After 2 years of genocide, we were saying, as Palestinians, طولت.
It's gone on too long.
It's gone on
Too long. Would be
That's the right translation.
It was written in Deir al-Balah.
Exactly, where I'm from.
In December 2023. So it's only like 2-3 months into the genocide, and it was already too much. So every time I look back, and I was like, what have we survived so far? Which is immense. But I have to share, like, the fight it was. The fight that we as generation of artists faced in the making of art, which is first and foremost the lack of material. And I call this systematic because especially after the attacks on Gaza, the canvas suddenly disappears.
Of course.
The art stores are bombed entirely. Art paints are not allowed. Some art paints, like the black is not in. Well, why is the black banned? Oh, but, they are afraid it will be used for bombs. And I was like, it doesn't make any sense. We're painters. But, being an artist in the Gaza Strip, you are seen as a person of intellect and mission. You're seen as a person resisting the occupation. Throughout the decades of art making and the art history, artists would go to jail because of what they have painted. Artists would cover their painting, which holds a political theme, with a landscape scene, peaceful, nothing triggering, nothing. So they could travel through the borders without being confiscated. So you grew up, and I had, and I was privileged to grow up in a family where my maternal uncle, my mom's maternal uncle as well, they were both artists who made art, who taught art in the Gaza Strip. So I got to see what it is to make art in the 60s, 70s, and what it is to make it in early 2000. And what really the difficulties could be combined as suppression. You could not travel. You could not exhibit this. You could not go to Jerusalem. And I also had a taste of that because I was not allowed exit for my exhibitions. I was not allowed to go to Jerusalem for a group exhibition I was invited in. So you live in a complete blockade, and part of it is cultural, because there's vibrant cultural scene, for example, in Ramallah, in Jerusalem, etc. But you are completely cut off from what is going on, from the residencies. But as artists, we always found ways to put things together, to make an exhibition, to rent out a place and call it a residency for young artists to experiment. There was nothing like impossible. So I know an artist we've exhibited once together. She couldn't afford the art paints, so she went into spices as a cheaper alternative. She went into henna, she went into tea and coffee. So, and most recent in the genocide, there was no canvas. So what artists would do, they would use the cardboard of the aid boxes in turning them into self-portraits and portraits of people. One of these artists, Ra'ed Isa, he's one of the artists who really documented the genocide by whatever he could find available. So having studied in a leading art institution, in my master's at Central St. Martin's, and I think of my experience growing up with almost nothing, but still managed to have the longest CV in Gaza of exhibitions, group exhibitions, I just came to the conclusion that there is so much the world, especially the art world, has to learn from the Gaza scene, which is you occupy us, you put us in a cage, you prevent us from having art paints, you kill our artists, you kill and you destroy the art centers, the heritage, the culture. Rashad al-Shawa Center, Al-Mizhal Theater, which was one of the main theaters in Gaza, but we still rise and we still continue to make works and we still continue to tell the story, which is a strong part of our fight as people, which is through any means of culture. And as of next week, there's going to be the biggest exhibition to ever be held after the genocide by 65 artists. A lot of them are emerging. They have just started becoming artists during the genocide. So I
Where will
think
that exhibition?
it will be in Al-Wusta Al-Bridge,
In Gaza?
in the middle.
Wow.
Exactly. And a lot of these artists, you've never heard of them because they are 15, 16 years old, who went into art as a way of survival, but as a way of resisting this complete suppression and despair. So coming from this background, I just feel extremely privileged to have witnessed that, to have fought that, to have also worked with artists in exhibitions where budget was not really the biggest concern, where the place was not a concern. One of the exhibitions I took place in, it was at the port, the Gaza port. So it was basically you bring your work and we give you the easel and you just exhibit it. And we would have hundreds of people coming every day to see the work. So there was a strong culture and strong scene that was that kept rising.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you in that context about your impulse to art or your impulse to a painting? Because I think, very often, people think of it as some kind of abstract response to events. Oh, I'm going to paint a painting because these things are going are going on, and therefore I'm going to make it this way. Whereas my experience of the artistic impulse is not that. And so, and what you're talking about here, in terms of the variety of different artists, right, in the context of genocide, their impulse to produce art. Where for you does it come from? And also, how do you read it in others?
Yeah, so I remember the first impulse to make art, which was in 2014. And I was only 14 years old. And I saw the scene of my neighbor being pulled from the rubble, killed. And I just felt like now is the moment I make. Because I might die, I might live, but this is what will get me through what I'm seeing. So I started making sketches out of really escaping and survival. So that was my first impulse. But now the more I paint, it's more about, I'm just aware of how much there's strong techniques to erase us as people, to erase the narrative, to erase the museums, to erase the artists who are making art. And I feel like it's my commitment and mission for us not to be erased, to preserve our memory as much as we can. So the next generation of the Palestinians could look at what we've produced as artists and understand what happened, what we've been through. And that's exactly how I connected with the Nakba in 48. If there hasn't been the paintings of Suleiman Mansour, of Ismail Shammout, of Tamam al-Akhal, who've literally painted what they've been through and how they became refugees in 1948, I wouldn't have understood the tensity, understood the visuals, what exactly happened through these scenes.
Before I forget, touching on this, we have a painting here behind me of Huda Zaqqout. Huda Zaqqout, her story breaks my heart, actually. She's in our previous studio. We had so many of her paintings here in the studio, but people don't know that during the genocide she was killed.
Yes,
and we wanted to buy some of her art and put it in our studio. We messaged her Instagram page, and her husband responded.
Exactly,
and he said, "You can take whatever you want. You can take it for free." He didn't even charge us. But Hiba is not the only artist who was killed during the genocide.
One among so many people.
One among so many artists who you knew.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of them, very quickly, please.
Yes. So Huda Zaqqout is an artist I connected with online through Facebook. And I could say she was one of the most prolific artists of her generation, of her time. She focused in her work on painting the cities she could only dream of visiting and not being able to visit, like Jerusalem, Nablus, Khalid. So her work was mostly focused on the cities, the towns, the villages, but also the family connection, the motherhood. And she painted a self-portrait of herself and her 4 children playing together. And I recall this painting so vividly. It was yellow and she was playing with her kids. And unfortunately, she was killed early on in the genocide. I recall one of the artists that I'm so moved by, Mohammed Sami Qriqi. He was only 24 years old when he was killed. And he was one of the artists who's known to be very active in the society through activities, through trying to distract children from the intensity of bombardments. And the last scene of him was in the Baptist hospital. And he was killed alongside the children during the massacre that took place at the Baptist. Dargham al-Rassam, he was one of the artists I had a group exhibition in. He was newly married. He started his life in a tent and he was killed. And he reported the last moments of his murder. Although Fatima Hassouna was a different profession from what I did, she was a filmmaker. But what really strikes me is all of these artists share the same age as me. 24, 25, 26. And I just feel strongly like they should have had the chance to be alive and make their work just the way I did myself. And she was killed, Fatima. Yeah.
Why does Israel kill artists? What is the military objective behind killing artists in Gaza?
I mean, the question is why Israel is killing all aspects of Palestinian society.
Why killing Palestinians?
To me, artists are part of society in the same way as plumbers, or in the same way as carpenters, or in the same way as doctors. There is no differentiation. What we've seen is, the word genocide attached to every single form of profession or society, whether it's ecocide, or whether it's culturicide, or whether it's educide, or whether it's, because it's the complete erasure. I mean, and that's what we see with all settler colonial projects. I have, one of the things that I've done recently is record the audiobook for Eyal Weizman's new book on grounding, the architecture of genocide, and this concept of ungrounding, right? Where literally, I mean, he calls it a war on the subsoil of Gaza. It's not just on the buildings, it's not just the surface, it's the subsoil.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's from all that reflects all aspects of society, as it does the literal soil, in terms of what it would take for the soil to grow an olive tree in the future. And how that has a systematic history in relation to what was done to Wadi Gaza, in that area that used to be the breadbasket of the whole of Palestine, but in terms of, what's been done to the water, it's all these kinds of things. So if I can reframe your question, it's not so much why, it's also what happens when a generation of artists is destroyed, is assassinated, is killed. How is that? That is an assault on. That is an assault as well on forms of witness.
Yeah.
Because what are artists? In the same way as what is what is it to kill that many journalists? Right. That is killing a relationship with the news, the information, the narrative that is able to come out now.
Yeah.
Right. Artists. Some of us have an ability or desire to be able to respond in the moment. But part of what our work is to try and respond with narratives and stories and reflections that put the now in a contextual, put them in lots of different frameworks of thought, and require a different form of thinking, or require a different form of form, in order to do it, there are structural reasons, there are obvious reasons why there have not been many fiction films that have been made in Gaza over the last 2 years. Of course, there have been amazing films that have been made in Palestinian films that have been made outside. But, so it is an assault on the ability of a culture to achieve its potential, which is why when we see the work of people like Malak and otherwise, or all of these artists who have managed to continue to work out of a need in Gaza, we're seeing the evidence of near miracles, which are all the more precious for their ability of what they're able to capture.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, it's so painful.
Yes.
To know, the extent of what has been lost, what has been ungrounded.
But if I may add, very briefly,
yes, please.
That especially in our region, there is a history of assassinations against people who are poets, intellects, or Some of them were like poets, but also political leaders. And I recall what Najil Ali has said: if you want to paint or draw or write about Palestine, consider yourself dead. And I think so much of Dr. Rifat Al-Arair, who I've had the honor of collaborating with on the book Light in Gaza. And I think of how many times they have threatened him, chased him, and tried to kill him till they killed him in December 2023.
Yep.
So growing up in Gaza, you just know the real value of a painting, because you know that artists have been imprisoned by simply painting the colors of the flag: green, white, black, and red. For example, in the 80s, there was a collective exhibitions. Sliman Mansour, Hassam Badr, other were a part of it. It was shut because the artists were painting figures with the flags, the color of the flags. And that's how about
Of course, because the
watermelon
art
became,
carries culture and
I guess there's,
message.
I mean, this is an important thing to say about it. The war, and I'm talking about the long war here, not against Palestine, which of course includes the genocide, right? But depends on the dehumanization of Palestinians and Arabs more broadly speaking, but the dehumanization of Palestinians. And so to go back to your question, like why attack artists, right? Art is always a symbol of humanity.
Exactly.
And it pierces through. That's why it is so dangerous to the propaganda Israeli project against Palestine, right? And it's one of the reasons that artists are so dangerous within that context, because immediately if an artist can make you cry, or if an artist can make you laugh, or an artist can make you feel inspired, and they are part of the depth of that culture, then it makes entirely clear when you kill, when you decimate, when you commit genocide, when then it makes entirely clear what is being destroyed, what is being attacked. It is a people.
But
it is not numbers,
Talking about numbers and art and something that deeply, deeply moved me is your latest song, a simple song. Can we watch a segment of that song and talk a little bit about it, please?
This is a simple song. A simple song. This is a simple song about simple things. A simple song about simple things. A simple song about simple things. A child is killed. A child is killed. A child is killed. So many killed. This is a simple song. A simple song. A simple song about simple things. Who was that child? What was their story? What would they say? They were here today. This is a simple song.
This, it was cut short. The full song is very beautiful, but it's because we have only 10 minutes before we finish unfortunately, the chat show. When I watched the video, all of it, and I saw the thousands and thousands of children's clothes on the beach, it struck me in my heart. Yeah. So I want to ask you, tell me about the song first, and how did you feel watching this video after it was recorded?
Yeah, what inspired it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, you call it my latest song. It's my only song. Simple song and only song. I mean, there are other songs.
Voice.
There are other songs that I've been in my life, but this is the only song that has come out of me into the public. And a year ago, was when I released this into the world. And we were speaking earlier about the need or the impulse. And as you know, as most people know who know me, I'm mainly known as an actor and working in film and theatre. I never expected myself for a song to come out of me, but part of what happened was it was in January of last year, soon after that ceasefire was called. And then there was this rise in devastation, and I was so in pain at what people in Gaza and Palestine had to face after everything they had already been through. That in my attempt to just feel how I was feeling, a song started to come out of me. And those songs turned into a tune. And I have a relationship with the piano, so I went to it. And then within 2 days, I had this song that was responding to the idea of complexity that is constantly thrown at us and at Palestinians, that this is complex. And so from this simple song comes this question, who was that child? What would they say if they were here today? And I continue and I tell the story as I believe they would say it. And also, then kind of, well, if you want peace, give me justice.
Yes.
End the occupation, share the land. One law for all of us and no more walls. There are simple ways of condensing this. And so it kind of required that. And actually, one of the interesting things you talk about the video that actually draws us together, the video is led by donkeys.
Yes, the installation.
And, one of the figures in that was part of the Together for Palestine concert. And there is this way in which all of these roads kind of lead us to each other. For me, it's part of it's part of the vulnerability of it all as well.
Tell me about your politicization. I remember in one of your speeches or interviews, you said the earliest protest you participated in and you shouted the Free Palestine when you were 3 years old. Is that true?
Yes. I mean, so both my father and grandfather were political prisoners on the left in Egypt. I come from a family of struggle. It's part of what resulted in me being born in Scotland, as you can tell from my accent. But we moved down to London. Well, I'm joking. That's the joke, right? But we moved down to London when I was 4. And my first protest was on my father's shoulders for Palestine.
Wow.
And one of the things about growing up as an Arab in a country like Britain is that you, as opposed to had I grown up in Egypt, in which most of the people around me would just be Egyptian, right? You grow up really as an Arab. And I grew up with Palestinians. I grew up with Iraqis. I grew up with Syrians. I grew up with, with people from across the region. But, Palestine has always been at the core of my experience of what it is to be an Arab in this world. I sometimes say, and I believe it, Palestine is what made me an Arab, is what makes me an Arab.
Wow.
And it sits as a crucial part of the compass of how you interpret the world around you.
But also that was reflected on your artistic journey. being an Arab in movies and on drama?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, I graduated from university in 2003, the year of the war in Iraq. 9/11 has already happened, so I start my life as an actor in a world in which I'm being looked at in the shadows of 9/11. I've already lived through Kuwait. I've already lived through the Intifada. I've already lived through all of these, all of these mediatized forms of violence as well on the idea of what it is to be an Arab. And so the question that I face throughout my life and career in film and theatre is, how are you going to relate to that form of representation? Are you going to go with the tide of its dehumanization, or are you going to fight that in the various ways that you can? Part of that is in choosing projects. And then the other part is in when you're in certain projects, how are you going to negotiate with them to improve them or to make them better representations? And then comes the other question of then what projects are you going to make and who are you going to collaborate with? And at what points are you going to be working on this side of the world, and at what points are you going to be working on the other side of the world? Because I've also had, significant
Khalid,
periods working in Egypt. So, yeah.
I want to ask you before we run out of time. So many people recognized you for your role in The Crown as Dodi Al-Fayed. And that was a major role that you took in that series. I watched it and I was amazed with with the character that you played. Can you tell me more about that role and why did you take it? Especially, it came at a time where the genocide was ongoing. So it was special at that time.
Well, no, I mean, the story I always tell, and it's really important in relation to me playing Dodi, because it's not what I expected at the beginning, is that, the Dodi and Diana season came out at in November of 2023, when the genocide was, really unfolding. And I didn't realize until I was really faced with the question, what are you going to do? That Dodi is the first character I can think of in the history of film on this side of the world who's an Arab, who you get to know and love, not fear. And so when he dies, you mourn him. And this says, it screams out in the context of a genocide in which thousands of people are being killed as if they are ungrievable and unmournable. And what the failure in representation of Arabs, generally speaking, within culture and media, how it then affects the ability to mourn, the ability to see, the ability to humanize. And so, my journey with Dodi, there are many things that we can talk about in relation to it, but I hadn't, because, the funny thing is that at first I had no, Dodi, why me? It's crazy.
Although you look like
but that's it. Everyone kind of, and there are stories in relation to that. But I realized, even in the process of taking the role, there are things that I didn't know. Even though we've seen his image for 25 years or so, in magazine stands and all over, standing next to Diana. The question is, what does he sound like? What do we know about him other than who his father is? And there's hardly anything. And again, that goes back to these kind of questions of structural racial injustice, right? What kinds of questions are asked and what aren't? But as I say, I had no idea, because I realized at the beginning of taking on the role, when I confirmed, because this was one of the big questions at the beginning, is it going to be a role that is given the dignity of a proper character? Or is it a role in which he's sort of going to appear as a bit of eye candy and be kind of meaningless because the real event is Diana? And the fact that, Peter Morgan and the makers of The Crown were going to give the Fayed family, the space to be explored, meant, okay, here is a massive cultural opportunity that I recognize. And, you know, and I obviously had a whole team of people, and the amazing Salim Daw and others, you know, in terms of understanding the scale of this opportunity, because it's very rare that these kinds of resources are put in the direction of storytelling that have Arab characters also at their center. So I understood its value right from there, but I'd never expected that it would then put me in the circumstances of understanding this fact that I was talking about earlier, that I had never, you know, of him as one of the first mournable, grievable bodies, stories in the history of, you know, whatever you want to call it, Western Hollywood film, and the rarity of that. And then for me, that created the, you know, the circumstances of these various, you know, red carpets or cultural events in which I would rupture through with, you know, the words that I wrote on my hands and the various interviews, and also, and I think this is a crucial thing, discovering in turn the circles of solidarity that exist that are far wider than what I expected. And, you know, there's a whole story that you could draw again from that in relation to the moment of Together for Palestine. And also then where we are now, right? In this moment in which, okay, a form of silence has been broken. And yet there are attempts to reassert it now. And also questions for us, broadly speaking, as a generation, okay, if there has been a shift in consciousness, and people have declared an alliance with wanting to move in a direction towards justice, and then what do we do about it? What kind of work do we make?
Yes.
And one thing I also want to mention, because it's important. This Nakba on the 14th of May. In the Troxy, together with Health Workers for Palestine and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Mersem, there is an event in commemoration of the Nakba, in which Dabbour and Soul Band and Nasar Igberi and a whole range of magnificent artists, and particularly as well Palestinian-led, are going to be there. And here is this question, because we're moving towards the 80th anniversary of the Nakba in 2 years, right? And you know, everything in this conversation has, you know, is this concept of the ongoing Nakba. Right? Part of the trauma, as I understand it, of these last 2 years is this generational experience that it's a privilege for me to sit on watching you guys talk about, but is so painful, of you reliving the images of your parents and grandparents, right? And now we're at this moment where the world is beginning to see and understand that, right? The Nakba as an experience that has its own particularity, that has a relationship between the early settler colonialism project leading towards the genocide and this moment of expansion with genocide, you know. And I think for us collectively as artists, whether we are Palestinian or whether we are Arab and not Palestinian, or whether we are from other backgrounds, you know, the various allies and alliances, what stories do we tell? What images do we make? What forms of gathering can we hold as part of regenerating from this ungrounding?
I have a small question. Like, what's your view of this amount of acknowledgement of recent films about Palestine? Like The Voice of Hind Rajab. Is this a positive thing, or is it a passive? Like, what's your take on this acknowledgement, the prizes, the standing ovation?
if we can do it very, very in less than 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm just
because you have to
can
go.
also take
we
it,
have to
yeah.
go out.
I mean, the
I'm just
basic
cautious of time.
yeah,
for
sure.
you.
I mean,
Sorry.
I mean, the basic answer is, of course, it's positive. Yeah. But of course, it's positive. It's not a however, it's an and, right?
Yes.
There is no silver bullet. There is no one project that solves everything. What we need is more and more projects. What we need is a whole ecology of different things and different art forms and different spaces fighting for the change that we need to see. And I see these projects and the way in which they have been received as, again, projects that point the compass towards where we could go. And the solidarities and the alliances, I mean, as you'll have seen in Together for Palestine and otherwise, like backstage, part of what I felt was like, I felt like I was seeing change happening in slow motion.
It was a moment of
how
history.
people come together. And that's what all of these things are.
Yeah, guys, I really wanted to talk about so many other things. I want to talk about Together for Palestine, which you both organize. I want to talk about the depiction of the Palestinians and the Arabs in Hollywood and the drama, and so many other things. But unfortunately, we ran out of time. And I know you have an appointment, Khalid.
No, not at all.
We'll have to end it here. Thank you very, very much, Khalid.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you for Khalid as well.
And again, I just want to say it's an honor
It's
to be
our honor.
here in
Thank
this
you
space
so
with you
much.
guys.
And
Hearing you speak together and hearing the way in which you hold Gaza.
Yeah.
It's
very dearly. Yeah.
It's a real honor.
Thank you very much. And please, thank you very much for watching this show. If you watch it at all, thank you very much. If not, watch it and watch our previous chat shows. And see you next week, inshallah, at 7 p.m. Wednesday. Next time we'll be with Hala, inshallah. Thank you very much again.
Best of luck to Hala
Stay
on
tuned.
her doctorate.
And best of luck to Hala for her PhD. Thank you very much and bye-bye.